the 52nd Annual WBC Convention here at the beautiful Mirage in Las Vegas, joined by neurologist and longtime ringside physician and founder and president of VADA, Margaret Goodman. Great to see you again.
Great to see you, and thank you for having me.
You know, part of this whole week, it's a lot of people think about a convention like this, and obviously it's a plethora of pugilistic talent. Everybody's hanging out and having a good time, but really, you know, like Mauricio Suleiman said, the president, this is at the end of the day about the well-being of the fighters. And one of the things that's happened, and everybody's excited about it, is the WBC and a big announcement with VADA. I'm just going to let you take it away and tell us about it.
You know, this is just amazing. You know, there's some things in boxing that are monumental, and in many respects, I think people will look back on this and see how precedent-setting it is and how important it is to the sport. I think it's been about 4 or 5 months ago when I was at the NABF convention in Chicago and I was speaking on performance-enhancing drugs. Mauricio was there and approached us to help the WBC set up their own program for performance-enhancing drug testing, because Mauricio realized that there was a definite problem in boxing, as there is in all sport, and he also realized that now was the time. And so for the last few months, we've been back and forth to help them design their own program. And so it's going to actually have several parts to it. Most importantly, there is the education, just like in everything. And what we want to do is the education process will be twofold. One will be to the fighters themselves. The fighters, and we've talked about this, you and I, that they often don't know what's prohibited, what's not allowable, what kind of side effects a lot of these drugs have, such as anabolic steroids and stimulants, and things like growth hormone or erythropoietin for blood doping. What are the side effects of these, in addition to what things they can't take? And
the long-term effects,
The long-term effects. And I will say this, which I find very interesting. I was just talking, I know you've spoken with Dr. Bernick or the Lou Ruvo Center in town, and one thing that they are finding preliminarily is in some fighters, and even other athletes, maybe even with the NFL, that there are long-term effects on the brain of using anabolic steroids, that perhaps certain parts of the brain will shrink and what we call atrophy, so that they will become ineffective, such as some of the memory centers of the brain. So they're starting to find that there may be definite proof, finally, which I've always believed that there has to be proof out there, that drugs like anabolic steroids are really affecting the brain, as well as other parts of the body, like the liver and the kidneys and the heart and all of that.
You know, I just watched a thing on Lyle Alzado, and he died of brain cancer. And I wondered, even when it happened, because I interviewed Lyle before, and we were doing stuff on radio on the steroids way back in the 80s, and so many of the guys that I interviewed have passed away, because obviously whatever's being done with steroids now is better than it was, I guess. But I always wondered, and I don't know whether it relates to anything you're saying, but whether his brain cancer even could have been a byproduct of the steroids he was using.
You know, it's possible. I don't think there's any proof of that, but I think that it does affect the brain. It can cause the brain to shrink, and it also can change your immune system. And we don't, because anabolic steroids are illegal, and a lot of these drugs are illegal, especially with athletes, they're not studied. So even now, some of the studies that they're doing on chronic traumatic encephalopathy, they're now able to go back and find out more information on what these people were using in addition, or were they using anything before they passed away, when they're checking their brains on autopsy. So I think this is going to provide more and more information. So first and foremost is education, but the second part of the education process is the community. And you and I have talked about this extensively, that boxing needs to go into the gyms. You know, we need to start when these kids are amateurs. We need to talk to them. A lot of them develop eating disorders, other health problems that start in the amateurs because they're forced to be in the wrong weight class. So one thing that Mauricio really wants to do, which we are so happy to help with, is start educating the amateur fighters, go to the community gyms, and even the schools, because up to 7% of boys, average age 15, have used anabolic steroids already, and up to almost 5 or 6% of girls. So the problem is starting a lot earlier. And if we're going to really stop performance-enhancing drugs in fighters, we need to start when they're amateurs. So that's the most important part of the education. The other thing that the program is going to offer, which was very important to the WBC, is we're going to have an online tutorial, not just for the fighters, but for anyone, trainers, yourself, that can go on and access this. And any fighter that's going to be involved in the program or wants to learn about these substances, they can take an online tutorial and quickly access it, even on their phone, to learn about some of the side effects of these, what are the substances. Also very important, what we've been doing, which I am so amazed about, and this was Mauricio's idea, was to have a course for collection officers. One of the biggest problems as far as expense in anti-doping, and I can speak to this when we've been conducting tests on several of the fighters we have through VADA, is the cost. Okay? The cost isn't so much the actual test. Yes, it's expensive to do really high quality tests through a WADA accredited lab, which are the only kinds of laboratories we use. But where the expense comes is the collection officers. So for example, when we were testing Manny Pacquiao and Chris Algieri in Macau, and when Manny Pacquiao was training in the Philippines, we had to send a collection officer over there. So you can understand the expense in sending someone. So what we've done, and this is what's so fun, and I've asked you guys to come in and take a look when we're having our second day course, is there's doctors from all over the world here right now. I think there's about 20 doctors in there from South Africa, from Germany, from Australia, the Ukraine, the Philippines, as well as the United States and Mexico, that are taking a preliminary course on how to chaperone and be a collection officer for anti-doping. And the company that we work with, Claridium, is world respected and world renowned. They test all over the world. And so they are here, there's 4 of them, and they are instructing all of us on how the collections are done from the beginning of how do you approach an athlete, how do you set up the collection station. So this is wonderful, and I believe as time goes on, we'll be able to train many of these individuals to be collection officers. And so they will be, if there's a fight that's in the Philippines, there will be a collection officer there. So that will help.
Thus cutting the cost.
Oh my goodness.
Immensely, right?
Tremendously. Yeah. And so that's a very, very important part. And this has never been done to my knowledge in this way. And so it's very exciting, and there's great questions being asked, and it's just a wealth of information. And that's another thing that the WBC offers, is they have so many physicians all over the world that work with the different branches of the WBC organizations, not just doctors that work fights, but doctors that are on their board. Dr. Paul Wallace, who's chairman of their board, is here. And so we are learning a lot and sharing this information. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we do as far as the education aspect, there's a group called the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and they are so important. Taylor Hooten was a young man who died, actually committed suicide in high school after using anabolic steroids. And his father...
Where at?
I think in Texas, but
okay.
Please forgive me if I'm incorrect. I know that they're based in Texas. Mm-hmm. And several years ago, and they've testified before Congress several times, they set up the Taylor Hooten Foundation, and what they do is they go into the schools, they go into the gyms, they go all over the country on a regular basis. Matter of fact, they're so busy now with all of the talk that's gone on with baseball and the NFL and the NBA and all of these other organizations. They are out there. They have a wonderful course that's already prepared, so they'll be helping with the education as well. And then the other thing that's really important that I'm sure that this has been discussed and you see it in the media all the time, is we work with an organization called Athletes Recovery, and they were here as well. They came all the way from Florida. And Athletes Recovery is run by Tina and Kenny Green. Kenny Green was a NFL player for many, many years. And he had great experience with friends of his that were using not only anabolic steroids, but other drugs as well, and had considerable amount of substance abuse. So they set up this organization that is based out of Houston, and actually Ronnie Shields is working with them. One of the great trainers in boxing. And so they have I think it's like a 50-acre facility. And they've got a boxing gym, an MMA gym. They've got all kinds of facilities and caregivers that if someone needs rehabilitation for this, it can be anonymous, obviously, because we do have athletes contact us on a regular basis. So they will be able to be involved and help if we do have fighters that have problems. It's going to start small, and none of this will start until the WBC has formulated all of their policies and procedures as far as results management, penalties, all of that. That will be the WBC and their team. Our organization never has done any adjudication. That will solely be up to the WBC, and they will be formulating this in the next few months. And so the program will not start at all until all of that has done, and especially the fighter education. Because as you well know, the last thing that anyone wants to see is any fighter testing positive. So there will be a several-month period where the fighters will be educated on what the program is, how they give us their whereabouts information, all of the other aspects of what they can and cannot take, and what they have to request a possible therapeutic use exemption for. All of that's going to be done before any kind of testing would be ever did this. This
You're
is
more about educating.
All about educating, yeah. And you know what? I mean, this is something we've also discussed, you and I have had so many talks, is the safety of the fighter is tantamount to anything. And there can't be safety to either the fighter, him or herself, or their opponent if they're on these drugs. Yeah. There's so many terrible things that can happen to them. And also, it ruins public confidence. There's no level playing field. And so clean sport is so important.
And more important in this sport, you can add obviously, you know, MMA to that, but in this sport, which is what I'm concerned, I'm involved in it, it's paramount.
Oh yes, there's just no question. And so that's why I just am so impressed that the WBC wants to take the lead on doing this, because truth be told, I mean, where else is this being done with professional fighters? Nowhere else right now. And the other problem with boxing, and this is something that's always been difficult when I was a ring physician and also chairman of the Medical Advisory Board working with the Association of Boxing Commissions, each commission does their own thing. Yeah. There is no standardization. There's no standardization of what tests are performed. There's no standardization of penalties. There's no standardization of who gets tested and when. Some commissions do absolutely no drug testing. Some, like Nevada, have adopted and started doing unannounced testing for certain select fights. So that's far and few between. So
gotta have some consistency. I mean, we're not the NFL, the Major League Baseball, the NBA, but we need to take some of what they do and apply the consistency. The knowledge is there with people like yourself, and I really hope that. But I just on a blanket question, because how rampant do you think the whole steroid problem is right now in boxing on a 1 to 100, 100 being terrible? Where do you think? I know you don't know, but what would you think? Because so many of these athletes, like you say, a lot of them, maybe more than 50%, aren't even trying to cheat. They're cheating because they don't know what to take and what they can't take.
And someone else is giving it to them.
Yeah.
And that's, I would say...
I know it's a tough one.
I know it's a tough one, but I would say from myself, having talked to trainers and fighters, I would say that it's not as high as in MMA, but I would say perhaps somewhere around 40%. Yeah. And that's just too high a percent.
Right.
Obviously, you're never going to get rid of all the performance-enhancing drugs, but I think a lot of it is just like you said, that a lot of these fighters don't know what they're taking because somebody gives it to them. They say, yeah, drink this, eat this, take this pill. And so that's something else that I think Mauricio, when we sat and talked, he was just so adamant about that the fighters need to learn this themselves. Yes, you can have the best trainer with you in the world, but if you don't understand what you're putting in your own body, then what's the point? Yeah. You know, you've got to take care of yourself. And so I look at this as a real entryway into the fighters taking more responsibility. And so the other thing that for now, as the program will begin, this will not interfere with any commission testing that goes on. The commissions that do their testing, it's great. We're happy to assist and advise if they need, you know, drug testing after a fight. But basically, they will continue to do their own thing. This is a year-round program. And I think it's going to be a huge education for everyone, but I think most of all, the fighters will benefit tremendously. Well,
yeah, you've always been a champion for that, and of that. I can tell you're excited. One final thing, you know my pet peeve about the weigh-ins and what have you, and is there anything being done that perhaps we can somehow even the playing field if we don't do same-day weigh-ins, if we do, you know, a weigh-in the day before, and then 10% of the weight that they, something to where these kids won't be rehydrating 20 and 30 pounds, which drives me crazy.
Drives me crazy too. It drives me crazy because I think that also helps perpetuate this problem. Yeah. Not just drugs to help them lose the weight, but also
diuretics.
Diuretics, but also just drugs to help them feel stronger because they've tortured their body to lose the weight.
Right.
And then they end up spending training camp as a diet farm, which is just absurd for these high-trained fighters. And I think the other interesting thing about this program is the fact that because it can be throughout the entire year, I think the fighters will realize they better take better care of themselves and that they maybe can't abuse their bodies. But to answer your question, Greg Serb from Pennsylvania, and I don't know if you've ever
I know Greg, yes.
Greg has been working very hard and is working with the ABC on formulating some changes. One thing that we talked about when we had the Association of Ringside Physicians here the other, I think it was in the end of October, and they have a new president with a Dr. Rizzo, who's from Illinois. He was a former wrestler, and just like Greg Serb was a former NCAA wrestler. And so we're working on some kind of a weight certification where athletes will be certified to fight in a certain weight, and that will be followed. And I'm still a big proponent like you are. I think they need to change the weigh-in. I mean, it's just not working the way it is. But I think it all kind of fits together. The eating disorders, fighting in the wrong weight class, not preparing. Education and just not taking care of yourself. Dr. Flip Homansky, who you know very well, my significant other, always says, treat your body like a temple. And this is not something that's a hobby. If this is your job, anybody that has a job, like you have your job, you perfect your craft, you work at your craft. You don't just work at it 1 month out of the year or 8 weeks out of the year, and some of these guys don't fight that much. So you really have to work at it the whole time. And so, you look at fighters, even like a Miguel Cotto, you can see he's someone that takes good care of himself. Floyd is always taking good care of himself between fights. It's not just something that you can balloon up in weight or let your body deteriorate 8 months or 9 months out of a year and then go fight. That's just, if you think about the quality of fights you're going to have, your quality of your fights are not going to be nearly as good as they would have been if you'd been taking care of yourself all year.
So congratulations on this testing and educational program with the WBC. We can't wait to get started, and hopefully others in the sport will follow suit. How can people get more information about what you're doing, this and VADA in general?
Yes, generally they can go on the VADA website, which is vada-testing.org, www. Soon, I'm sure the WBC, they're going to be working on having all of this type of information on their own website. Everything is going to be very transparent as far as having the procedures, the policies. But if you go on the VADA website, we have all that for our own organization, and they will adapt what they need for them. The other thing that I think is very important is, I said we use only WADA accredited labs. Mexico City opened up a lab, I think last year, that is WADA accredited. We've been in touch with them as many of the WBC fighters are out of Mexico. We've working with we had several doctors here from Mexico this week, and we will be working with the Mexico City lab. We've already been in touch with them, as well as some other WADA accredited labs around the world.
Oh, thanks, and best of luck, and really the fighters in the sport need more champions of it like Margaret Goodman. Thank you.
Thank you so much.